Welcome to this week's lecture. The lecture is on prototyping, and anyone who has worked in a software development role will most likely have worked with text-based requirements. They give developers a set of goals, constraints for a piece of software that, if fulfilled, will give said software the best chance of success with its end users. This same concept applies to human-computer interaction and design. Prototyping is a practice that allows better expression of an interface and indeed user experience than that of text-based requirements. A prototype is basically a semi-functional model of a product that will help test the look and feel, as well as allowing better user testing at an early stage. So, the objective of this lecture is, as usual, to give you a broad overview of the subject area, in this case prototyping, and understand why it is incredibly important for you to learn about and use. To fulfill that objective, we're going to cover the following topics. And as usual, we have our online resources. On this course, we've provided you with these resources for a good reason. It is incredibly important that you have a look at these and read through them, as your coursework does require you to have read around the topics covered. So moving on into the content of our lecture. Prototyping at a very high level is about testing your designs. It allows us to do a number of things. It allows us to test the look and feel. It allows us to test the user experience and also the usability of our product before we develop the full-blown thing. It's much cheaper and easier to make changes at the prototyping stage than during development. It's a simple cycle: design and test, and keep doing it until you're happy that you've got the best possible interface that you can. So how easy is it to create a prototype? Well, as we've seen, it can cover aesthetic design, it can cover interaction design, and it can cover user experience design. It can be adapted according to time constraints. More time, as in all things, means more detailed. More detailed prototypes increase the likelihood of a well-designed product. So we have three sort of levels, so to speak, of prototypes. That is low level, medium level, and high fidelity. So low fidelity prototypes incorporate things like storyboards, sketching, things like that. Low fidelity prototyping is quick, it's cheap, it's easy to do. Anyone can do it. You don't need to be an expert to be able to do this. Storyboards are really useful for designing the user experience, especially with regard to task flow and interaction design. They're generally used to display the screens of a website or an application, along with annotations showing how a user progresses through said software, through those screens, to perform certain tasks. They especially help communicate how something works to stakeholders before it is developed. Paper prototyping follows on from this by allowing pieces of the interfaces to be reconstructed on paper and demonstrated. Think touching a button, then sliding a new screen on top to simulate screen transition. In order to give you a quick idea of how quick and easy this is, I'm going to show you how we sketched out the design to an app last year. So for this example, we're going to be sketching out an interface for the home screen of our museum app. This home screen, we decided, has three main components. We had the name of the museum and branding and things like that. We also decided there were important things to put in, like quick links. We also had a featured exhibit, and we had the list of events of what was on a specific day. So considering all these things, we decided to come up with a wireframe, and we sketched this out in paper as follows. So first off, we start out with the screen boundaries, and we just can do these as we go. It's not a big issue to get them completely accurate. This is more a layout thing than a precise wireframe. So we sketch out our device boundaries. Like so. And what we are doing here is actually a screen for a tablet computer or a large screen interface, as opposed to a mobile device. So now we've got a sort of screen boundary, we can go on to what we decided. So we decided to have a top bar. So if we put this in, And as noted before, these are quick and easy. There's no need to be accurate or think about straight lines or anything like this. This is going to be a quick shortcut to the home screen, so we'll put an H in there. And over on the right we are going to have another couple of shortcuts, so we're going to have a search button, we're going to have a language change button, and we're going to have a help button. In the middle we want some sort of branding for the museum, so for this example we'll just put in museum name. There goes our top bar. Now, as noted before, we have three main things. We have our top bar, we have our featured exhibits, and we have our what's on today. So we decided it was important to give our featured exhibit as much screen space as possible. So we decided that we would have an image of it, and we would put that here. And as you can see, this takes up nearly a quarter of the screen space itself, and that is important as it is the featured exhibit, and therefore it must command a lot of attention from the user. So if we put in that in a sketch, instead of drawing out an image, all we have to do is put a cross across the rectangle, and that tells us it's a placeholder. So there we have an image, and below that we have a little bit of information about this featured exhibit. So if we put in a box here, and we would put in the exhibit name here, but for the purposes of our prototype we will go with featured exhibit. And then in here we want some text about the exhibit. Not an awful lot, just a little bit to give the user a bit of information about what they're actually looking at. And then we decided that for this exhibit it would be important to have a number of features. So first of all, the user may want to show it on a map in relation to where they would be in the museum. So we'll put in a button here. And also they may want to find out more about that exhibit. So we'll put another button here. And then we'll close off this box, like so. And now we've got the left-hand side of our screen for a tablet. Now the other thing that we want to show is what's on today. So we may want a little heading over here to say what's on today. And then we're going to have a list. Very simple, of the events on show today. So each of these we have to summarize. Usually we'd have a lot of information about certain events, but we want a quick summary for the user. So we're going to have an image that relates to the event. We're going to have the title of the event, a short description, and then when does it start? So let's say 15 minutes from now, and it's in room A. And then to find out more about the exhibit, we could have a little arrow or something like that which the user could tap on. The idea here for us was the user could tap on the whole bar, so to speak, for the event, and that would take them to the page for that event. And we had a number of exhibits throughout the day, so the same applies. And so on. As you can see, as I've mentioned already, these do not have to be neat, as long as they're legible, which you may think this is or is not. But as long as you and your team can understand it, and a stakeholder can understand the general gist of it, that is what's important. The point of these is to be quick, easy and cheap. So there we have our two main sections. There is a vital component missing here, and that is the menu. And something that we considered as a team last year was the fact that when holding a tablet, the user's thumb is going to be in this sort of area. So we decided that it would be prudent to have a menu button coming out curved from the side of the screen in this area and make it a large hit area. And the idea was that our menu would also be curved so it would follow the track of your thumb. So there we have a very basic paper prototype of the home screen. This did evolve into a more filled out wireframe, as you can see here on the screen. And then eventually that did become the finalized app. So as you can see, it's very quick, it's cheap and it's easy to do this sort of prototyping, and it's really encouraged for things such as your coursework. Okay, so you've seen how it is with a low fidelity prototype, a sketch or indeed a storyboard. Next up we have medium fidelity, and that is basically a mock-up. Now, I would suggest that a mock-up is what you've probably seen the majority of when it comes to prototyping. Mock-ups are basically a more visual experience of what we've covered in the low fidelity section. It introduces more of a look and feel or aesthetic element to prototyping itself. Assuming you've got your wireframes designed and thoroughly tested, mock-ups ensure that users can gain more detailed ideas of how the app will look and work. It can be expanded into interactive mock-ups simply, either through HTML, CSS, specialist prototyping software packages such as Axure, Express and Blend. Can be expensive, but luckily if you're a student you can get them both for free, so take note for your coursework. But also through things like video editing or even PowerPoint and Visio can also cover this. And that sort of idea of an interactive prototype leads us into high fidelity prototypes, and that is implementation of a prototype. High fidelity prototypes tend to emulate the final product, at least in design and sometimes partly in functionality. These are mostly built using tools such as Axure again, or HTML, CSS and JavaScript. These prototypes sometimes end up as a launchpad for your final product, therefore can be very time consuming and are more useful when low fidelity prototypes have passed rigorous usability testing and design testing. We'll talk about this concept up next. Before we do, this is a high fidelity prototype. It's a screenshot of last year's application for the coursework, the one that won. We want to know, can you beat this? And we hope you can. So, now we come to testing. In general, stakeholders and end users are slightly less intelligent than Einstein, so really take note of his quote at the top here. You can really see how prototyping is an essential part of any design process. So sometimes the best testing methods are the quick ones. Grab a random person, set them in front of your design and ask them what stands out. How would they expect the application to work based on your design? Give them tasks and see if they can accomplish them. If they can't, see how they have tried to accomplish them. If they're clicking in one particular area of a screen instead of another, you can tell that there's something drawing their attention to there instead of where they should be. In previous lectures, Mashuda has already mentioned the granny test. This is a great idea, seriously. Pick your most vulnerable potential user. It could be an elderly person, it could be a young child, it could be anyone, but identify who the most vulnerable user of your application would be. Get them to try and work out how to use the application using your designs. If they can't, quite simply you have a lot of work to do. One more idea for testing, which is great for testing the actual visual aesthetic design, is showing someone the interface for 5 seconds and then taking it away. Ask that person, what do they remember? If they can't remember the important content or the messages you're trying to convey, chances are your content strategy, the information hierarchy, is wrong. If they can't remember what the purpose of the screen was, then basic affordances, visual emphasis, potentially the layout of your screen could have some issues. If they can't remember the type of product, well then you have some major issues with your branding, your navigation, even the messages you're trying to convey with your screens. Ensure that you test as part of a cycle. Don't simply design, test, write down what went wrong and move on to something else. Make sure that you go back and iterate. Make sure that when you get things that need to be fixed, you're going back and you're fixing them, and then you're testing them again until it's as perfect as it can be. Don't do all your design work in one go and expect it to be 100% usable. So if at first you don't succeed, you all know the saying, successful interfaces take a lot of work. And that is something that you really need to get into your head before you go away and try to make one. It can be disheartening at times, but remember that what you think makes sense doesn't actually necessarily reflect what your users think makes sense. If you design for yourself and not your users, you'll end up with a product that you love and nobody else does. Don't test it on experts, don't test it on your team. Test on the end users, especially test the most vulnerable ones, as we've mentioned before. This brings us to an end of the lecture on prototyping. As usual, we'll leave you with a practical task to do in class. Have a think about it. Again, as usual, have some fun with it and just see what you come up with. See you next week.